I'm never getting on that bingo bus, that much I know. My mother used to do that ATL stuff, buses to Atlantic City from like New York, or we lived in New Jersey, and then you go a little quarter. Yeah. And when she died, there was like a whole trunk full of rolls of toys. So it's like, what are you doing? Maybe you've done.
So if you guys want to, there should be a list of, if I counted right, 24 items. If there aren't, don't worry about leaving one blank. And just take them and shuffle them, write them in at whatever order you would like in the grid. And then as I say them, cross them off. And whoever gets 5 in a row, diagonally up, down, left, right, the first 3 people who win will get a little rubber duck. And there is a story behind the rubber duck. The rubber duck was not, so it is program related. The story goes, I haven't told you this yet, have I? Okay, I love telling this story, so that's why. So a boss walks in, has a team of software developers, and notices that one of his employees has a rubber duck on his desk. And he's confused and he's thinking, I wonder if that's like something that his kid has or whatever. And so he finally gets up enough nerve and he goes, why do you have a rubber duck on your desk? And the programmer goes, oh, that's my debugger. The manager goes, what are you talking about? That's your debugger. And he goes, whenever I get stuck, I look at that rubber duck and I tell him what's wrong. And the boss goes, are you insane? And so a couple years later, out comes a psychological study on how rubber ducks are actually talking to an inanimate object. You're more likely to talk to an inanimate object than you are to talk aloud just to yourself. And so they've done all these studies to show that if you say your problem out loud, you're more likely to figure out what's wrong.
That happens to me all the time. I'm like, oh, what's the name of that thing? And I'm thinking ahead and I'm thinking ahead. And then I ask somebody, and as soon as I ask them, I remember it.
Right.
I talk to my dog, so.
Oh, yeah.
Not quite as pathetic. It's close.
And so, of course, as soon as that study comes out, a bunch of these managers go out and buy rubber ducks for all their employees. And so I call it the developer starter pack, right? As if you have your little rubber duck, you know that you can debug and talk to someone. So we're going to be playing DNS bingo. If you don't know what any of these letters stand for, that is completely fine. I hope by the end of the night that I'm going to be able to get through all of them. And if I don't, what I'd like to do is by 8 o'clock or 8:15, take a break, open up a Google Doc with the list of all these terms, and then actually type in the definition. But as we go, if you want to jot down the definition like on the back of the bingo sheet, that's also completely fine. Helps solidify the terms.
We loved your last your spreadsheet. All the terms.
Oh, good, good. So I am hoping that this will be not only fun for you guys, but also help you learn these terms. And just to reiterate on the stream why I kind of shifted a little bit, I started to look at sales today and all the things that sales can do. And I realized that sales is going to be at least a 2-day project, if not 3. And next week we do have a short week. We won't be here on Thursday because it's 4th of July. So I didn't think it made sense to kind of like start picking up steam on sales and then come back in on Monday and have a 3-day gap. So I'm going to push that off until Monday. I know you guys were super excited about it. It is still coming. However, I thought about, okay, what can we do in a 1-day period that is going to be helpful for you guys? And the thing that I wish I had was someone who went through all the DNS configuration and went, okay, from buying a domain to buying hosting, to getting the hosting connected, to getting HTTPS installed, to getting WordPress installed, to connecting that to a database, to getting the email set up. How does all of that work? And that's a very common thing that you guys will see, right? Is if you get hired as a contractor, you'll have some local business come to you and goes, hey, I want to get on the internet. How do I get online? So we are going to get started. I'm actually going to flip this over because I don't want to cheat and have the term list. If you guys win, yell bingo, and I will bring over a rubber duck to you guys. And so.
I have a request for next.
Sure.
For like a few minutes before class.
Yep.
I mean, we're getting to class. If we could maybe read some help wanted ads, like the listings on Glassdoor. I think
Sure.
sometimes I can't exactly make out. I can see just me, but what they're talking about. Like sometimes like we're a .NET company or we're a
So I will.
company or we're this or we're that. And I know that it doesn't always mean that you have to have those, but I don't want to go into an interview and not even understand the end.
So
Or write a letter.
I will make that a homework assignment that if anyone finds a ad on Glassdoor or ZipRecruiter or Indeed or any of those,
Just a couple.
yeah, just a couple, send them to me in Slack, and that's definitely something we can do and go over. I will read it over the weekend, and then on Monday I'll come in with a debrief of what that means.
Does anyone else think that's? Sometimes they're like in a code, like.
There have been times that I've had an interview and had to tell the person who was doing the phone screen what their job description meant, because it sounds funny, but the person doing the phone screen is normally the HR person or the recruiter or the whatever. And oftentimes the recruiter is just a recruiter. They aren't a technical recruiter. And so, you know, I go in there and I'll start talking about something and they'll go, and you can hear it in their voice. So they just gloss over, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. And I take the time and I go, well, no, you really need to update X, Y, and Z in your job description. Because a lot of people get in there and I can't tell you how many times I've read something and I go, oh, so you guys use Java for your back end. What do you use that for? Oh, we use it on our website to make it interactive and make API calls. And oh, so do you use that on your server? Do you use Spring and MVC? And they go, no, that runs in the browser.
And then how do you handle that when you know more than they do? You know.
Right, so that's the concern. And so when you go, oh, okay, so you mean you use JavaScript? Yeah, that's the same thing, isn't it? That's just abbreviated. No, not quite, right? And so hopefully that's only the first phone screen, right? Hopefully that's just because you're talking to a non-technical person. But if you get to the level of second, third, fourth interview and they're using Java and JavaScript interchangeably, I would be seriously concerned about working there. There are a lot of companies that go, hey, we have one tech guy, the tech guy left, we don't know. And that's something to watch out for, is because they could be looking for an IT person who dabbles in programming. And for most developers, that's not the job they want to be doing, right? Where you come in and they go, oh, well, we need you to manage our email accounts for us and get the Wi-Fi working and manage other people's computers. And that is, I'm not dissing IT. IT is a very important job, but you guys are learning a skill set that pays a lot higher than IT. And so if you're interested in doing IT, that's completely fine. But there will be a lot of job descriptions out there that won't quite realize that there is a major difference between programmers and IT managers. So something to just keep in the back of your head while you are interviewing. Okay.
Can I ask a question about
Sure.
that?
Yeah.
When the Draynor and Flanagan gentlemen, I'm a little slurry.
No problem.
When they came in to talk to us, went into the interview, and one man was the director, vice president of IT.
Yep.
And there was another person, I'm not sure how tech involved he was.
Sure.
But he started the conversation like, what made you interested in IT? And I'm like, and the IT guys I work with were like, you know, web developers don't like to be compared with us. They're not, you know, that's
Right.
That's like, don't even mix those up. So I'm like, IT.
So
Is it also a whole overarching, like, That's why there's a VP of IT, but they also manage the web developers, or?
In a lot of companies, IT is anything information technology. So which is true, right? If you're developing a web application, that is information technology, right? That is, it can be lumped in there. It tends to be, what's more important is the job title, not your department. So if you're looking at the job title and that is a software developer, application developer, or they tend to like engineers better than developers,
Right.
which is personally a pet peeve of mine.
But even people who are not engineers I hear have their title changed to engineer.
Yes.
The company, friend of mine, he's like, I didn't go to school for engineering, but I can take apart a car, so, and.
Yeah, so I have a definition of engineer versus developer that's a little different. I personally think that anything development is, if you're getting an app together, if you're using frameworks, if you're kind of piecing code together, that's what a developer is. An engineer is someone who is maybe writing more algorithms, is doing more optimization, might not be full stack, but is really specialized in one particular area and can make things run faster, is working in lower level programming languages like C. That's my personal definition. And I go back and forth with people on this all the time. And they go, okay, well, what happens when your developer needs to write some database query and it's not running fast enough, so they have to tweak it? Is that still development? And I go, well, no, that to me personally leans more engineer, right? And so there's a Venn diagram. There's a lot of overlap between the two. But there are a lot of companies right now that are hiring engineers that keep on running into this issue of these college students are graduating, have a 4.0 GPA, and they go, okay, we need this web app. And they go, well, I don't know what that is. Like, I don't know how to make that. They go, well, your resume says that you know Python and that you know HTML and CSS and that you know SQL, so why can't you make a web app? And they go, well, we never had a class that used all of those together. And that's very true. I'm a computer scientist. I learned about variables. I learned how to write my own compiler. And in most CS courses, 4-year college degrees, you do take a class on compilers or memory management and figuring out how to tell the computer where to store your variables and dealing with data types and bit storage and all of that stuff. And while there's definitely a need for that, and Google and Apple and all those companies hire thousands of people to make a Google search be able to return 4 billion results in 50 milliseconds, I see more job demand for what I classify as a developer. Again, that is not an industry standard definition, and that's something that Bootstrap versus no Bootstrap or tabs versus spaces. I get into fights with other developers all the time over that.
I heard from a local developer whose title at his local job is engineer. Said they only gave him that title. He's a developer. He identifies himself. He's a developer. They gave him that title because it looked fancier to external.
Yes.
And
oh, you're an engineer, we can't bother you, your time is very valuable.
He doesn't have an engineering degree, he doesn't have a computer, he's
right.
Doing it forever.
Right. Yeah, it's something that definitely goes around in the industry. Like I said, I personally have that delineation and I've thought about that. And my title on my website, the thing that I chose for myself is full stack developer, mentor, and hacker.
Awesome.
And that's what and a lot of people go, oh, hacker, are you white hat or do you do penetration testing? Do you go, and I go, no, what I do is I hack things together. I go out and I find things that I want to work on or two things that probably shouldn't be together and I put them together and that's what I do.
Like Frankenstein.
I Frankenstein things together. And people, oh, well, that's not what a hacker is. And I go, well, then go look up what a hacker is defined as. And when you look up hacker in the dictionary, it says nothing about security. It says nothing about viruses. It says a hacker is actually someone who does that, who just Frankensteins things together.
Yeah, but you know that people read the girl with the dragon tattoo, and that's what they know from hackers.
Well, it's not even the girl with the dragon tattoo. It's, oh, well, I heard on the news that hackers stole 4 million credit cards, right? And it's like, I saw a news segment, Apple just recalled 15-inch MacBook Pros between a 2-year period because the batteries needed to be recalled, right? And what are they showing? They're showing this model MacBook, which is not the one being recalled. So how many people are now going to get in a panic and go, oh my God, I just bought this brand new MacBook. I need to go return that to the store. And it's like, that's not the one that was recalled. You don't have footage of the one that was recalled. So instead of sending someone out to get footage, they use the stock footage. And now my mom's calling me going, what do I do about my laptop? That's not the right laptop. So there is a lot of media perception around that. I get annoyed by the paranoia that triggers. But yeah, it's important to look past the title, look past what, and I asked that a lot on the first interview question, is like, not looking, like, I read your job description. What does this really mean? And so the question I ask on the first screener is, what would your ideal job candidate look like? And they love that question, because what it lets them do is get outside of HR, get outside of, and I make sure that when I ask that, it's not just the HR person doing a phone screen, but someone who's actually going to be my manager or whatever. And what they get to is they get, they give you feedback that they weren't allowed to write on the job description because it wasn't politically correct, or because they've used the same job description for 2 years and they haven't been able to change it, or you know, it's a big company and the job description has to go through 8 different people and one person had a problem with that bullet or whatever it is. And so they get to tell you flat out, like, hey, this is something that's lacking in the team and that we would like to hire for. And then I take that question and I use it against them and I tell them how great I am at whatever they just told me is.
Funny you should say that.
Right, exactly. And you always want to tie it to a story, right? So you don't just say, oh yeah, I'm great at that. You say, here's a story of when I was great at that. Okay.
There was something else. There was something posted, I thought of you because you're doing the data analysis. But on Medium, the New York Times posted the data collection class that they give to their journalists. And they put a bunch of materials up, their training materials and stuff, and I don't remember where I saved it to. But when I do, I'll post the link on Slack. It looks really cool when I saved it somewhere. I think I would look at it. Anyway.
There's a great new book that came out, and I'm only 20 pages into it, but it's author of the New York Times who noticed how people aren't staying in 30-year careers anymore and working for the same company for years and years. And the book is about how to adapt, because when you're hired for a job in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, not 10 years, but in a couple years, you're not going to be doing your job description anymore. You're going to be doing new things, right? And he talks about how it used to be that if you were a writer for the New York Times, you were a writer, and they hired, 50 writers, they hired 20 editors, they hired 10 layout specialists, and they hired 10 printers, right? And every time you wrote a story, it would go through all of those steps. But you would never work with the publisher. You would only work with the layer after you, right? And so what he talks about is now that's not the case. Now, if you are writing a story, you go over to the data visualization team and work with the data visualization team, and then they send data back to you or whatever, and then you go to the web developers and you talk to the web developers, and the web developers send you over to the designers, and you're working with all these people. But employers really want to see not only that you're willing to work with those people and collaborate, but you're also willing to I don't want to say stoop to their level, but understand what they're doing, try and make their job easier. When you're out writing a story, maybe you want to ask for that data source and understand what the web developers need, and not just make it, oh, this is a requirement of the job, but hey, in order for me, they call it being a T-shaped individual. So you not only want a depth of knowledge in your particular field, right, which is the long part of the T, but you also want your horizontal knowledge. So you want to be, you know, they call this the European man back in the days. You want to know a little bit about everything, which is the whole point of liberal arts. So if you go in and start talking to someone and they go, oh, I'm a doctor, you can take your depth, your part of the long part of the T, and then spread that over to the medical field. So instead of just throwing technical stuff at them, you can go, oh, the medical field, I work with electronic medical records, and I know that that's a big issue in your industry right now because it takes up so much time. What's one thing you wish your EMR could do better? Now, all of a sudden, you're bringing them into your field, but you have that conversation, and the way you're bringing them into your field is through their field. And so they call that being a T-shaped individual, is that you want to be clear that you're not just a developer and engineer and you just have your skill set, but you're able to communicate, you're able to bring your other experiences into other fields, which I think is super important in tech, because what industry can you get into that doesn't involve technology these days? And I've heard some pretty good answers, like being a lumberjack. I'm like, really? How do you think they track what woods they've cut down, how much lumber they've done, the productivity of each employee, what parts you need? Right. And I go, technology, right? And it's like, what job can you do these days that either you're not in front of a computer or someone else is doing the computer work for you? And I think I make the argument that learning how to program is now important than learning a second foreign language.
I just put it in resources.
So I did a brief stint at Upstate Hospital,
Mhm.
and it was a little funny to me because one of the disconnects between HR and a doctor once he got hired was that so when a doctor comes on board within a certain amount of time, he's supposed to get training from certain staff members in IT on how to enter procedures in so that they
Sure.
can be built properly.
Sure.
So during my time there had been a doctor who had been there for 2 years, and they had just caught the fact that he never received this type of training.
Yep.
And yeah, so there were a lot of procedures that he had done and the hospital wasn't getting money for it because he never entered the codes.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, there was a whole nother, I could do a 3-hour class on what's wrong with the healthcare and insurance industry from the tech perspective, but that is not the topic for tonight, and I don't think everyone would quite enjoy it as much as Yeah, I had a procedure that was in network, but I have out-of-state insurance. And so it was in network, out of state, but under contract. So because it was under contract, that was handled differently than the fact that it was in network, out of state, and out of contract. Now, both of them got paid, but I need a prior authorization for the one that is in contract, but not for the one that's out of contract. And I said, okay, no problem. I understand that there's a system. Can you tell me where to go to get this information? Oh, no, that's not public.
Stop telling them that you're a coder and start telling them that you're a lawyer. Like, I just tell people I'm a lawyer. They have no way of knowing. I mean, I can, but they wouldn't know.
And so I said to them, well, how much, okay,
A tip for everyone.
how much is this procedure going to cost? Oh, we can't tell you that information.
It's different depending on who we're billing. And it was insurance company it is, and yeah, really all worked out behind your back.
But yeah, God forbid we have public insurance.
I trust. Yeah. Anyway, so let's dive in. Poll of the class, how many people have bought a domain name?
10.
Okay. And how many people have set up web hosting? Okay. And how many people are confident that they have that configured properly? Okay. You want to put it to a test?
No, well, I have very good tech support. So anytime I run into a problem, I just go into that little side chat and they
So the reason why I push you on that is because there are lots of levels of DNS configuration. And there are a lot of optional steps for configuring your DNS. And as I'm going through this process, I am going to try and flag what steps are optional. What has made this very complicated is encryption, right? Because the way the DNS system works, I'm actually going to try and share my iPad screen because I would like to draw some of this out. You guys aren't going to be able to read my handwriting, so it doesn't matter anyway, but I'm going to give it a try and see if it works. Join a meeting.
You just said encryption makes it difficult. What was the sentence before that?
Maybe that too. That's not.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
Again, I gotta watch the video.
Um,
The last 2 days, just to let you know, or last week, I think I'll be watching those videos about my capstone development because that was really.
I had a major goof when I first set mine up because I thought I wanted to do everything through WordPress. And then when I wanted to get rid of it and I put up an index.html, and every time I would go to my web page, it wasn't recognizing it. And I was like, what the heck did I do? So I had them just tear all of that down so I could start fresh.
so we're going to install WordPress tonight and get it all connected. Okay. So I wonder if I rotate and close that full screen. There we go. All right. So DNS is the system that powers the internet. If I didn't put DNS on DNS bingo, I'm going to be very disappointed. Of course I didn't. Okay. So the way DNS works is I go out and I buy my domain name, right? So I'm the end user, right? And I want to go to google.com. Where does google.com go? So the computer goes, I don't know what google.com is. I need to go get that DNS record. So what happens is it goes out to the DNS system, and the DNS system goes, oh, who owns google.com? What registrar has google.com? Let's just say Namecheap owns google.com. So it goes to the NS records, the name server records, and it goes, oh, okay, google.com, their DNS records are at dns1.namecheap.com. Okay, so let's go over to that server, and that server has a bunch of records. One of those records is going to be an A record. And that A record is going to have an IP address. So that IP address is going to be 1.2.3.4. That then gets sent back up through the DNS system and back to you. So now your computer goes, okay, I know you requested google.com. I don't know where google.com is. I don't know how to route to that. But I do know that google.com is equal to 1.2.3.4. So I can now get Google's website. So that's the basis of the DNS system. Now, when you buy a domain through a registrar, the registrar is where you set your name server up. So you have two options. You can either point that name server somewhere else and go, hey, I host my DNS at another company like Cloudflare, or I have my DNS hosted through you guys. So if I want to add a record, if I want to point a subdomain somewhere else, if I want to get my email set up, I can go to my registrar and update it at the registrar if the name servers are pointing at their hosting. Most registrars offer, I think almost all of them, offer DNS hosting. So your name server always points to their DNS host, their DNS server, and then that's where you would put your A records and other things as well. Or you can change your name server and you can say, hey, I don't want to manage any of my DNS records here. I just want to point them somewhere else. I want to tell Namecheap or Google Domains or whoever you bought your domain from, just go to this other place. I want to set my name server there and it's going to go there. What happens is if you do that, it's going to disable, or it should warn you that none of the things that you update in their DNS panel are going to matter. So there are two ways of setting up your DNS. You can either, when you buy web hosting, you can either say, hey, Google Domains, my name server is now my web host. And my web host, that's where I'm going to manage all my DNS records. Or you can say, hey, Google, I have a new web host. So I'm going to set up all my records with you there, my A records, my MX records, all of those kinds of records. And that's where you can send those pieces of information. So there are a couple kinds of records. Get ready to cross off because I'm going to try and go through them off the top of my head. There are A records. A records are what you use for a typical website, right? So A records are your translators. Okay, I go to google.com. Google.com is equal to 1.2.3.4. And you can have A records on subdomains as well, right? So your root record is what's going to happen when you go to google.com. But what happens when you go to www.google.com? Well, you need an A record for www that points to your 1.2.3.4. You also have Cname records, which are very similar to A records, except for the fact that they're not an IP address. So A records always have to be IP addresses. Cname records don't have to be. So what you can do with a Cname record is say, hey, www, go point that at whatever the A record is of google.com. So your Cname record has to resolve to an IP address. But what if you want to set up blog.google or blog.google.com? Well, blog.google.com, I actually want to point at medium.com or google.medium.com. So what I'm doing is I'm basically saying it's similar to an alias, and it's going to point whatever blog.google.com is to whatever google.medium.com is, essentially.
So the C record is equivalent to an
Cname.
Cname record. Okay.
It's not quite equivalent to an alias, but it's like a shortcut. It's basically saying, hey, go point here. Just like an A record is equivalent to an alias, and that it's going, oh, whatever my A record is pointing at 1.2.3.4. A Cname is doing that, except it's pointing at another domain name. It's not pointing at an IP address. Now, we also have MX records. MX records are how you use the DNS server to point google.com at my email server. So most times, or actually I should say this, back in the day, MX records are how you told the DNS system where your email host was, and still to this day. What has changed is it used to be that your web host and your email host almost always were the same email server. And only in super big companies was your email server somewhere else. So, I have 10,000 employees and I have 50 different websites. I don't want to set up my email server on my website host because my website is optimized to serve thousands of websites. My email host is to optimize receive thousands of emails. So what ends up happening is most times your MX records point to the same place your A record is pointing to. They both point to your web host. Thanks to the surge of things thanks to the surge of cloud-hosted web services like G Suite, which is what Google calls their business class, Gmail, Google Docs, all of that stuff, and other things like Outlook, hosted email, things like that. A lot of people are now splitting their web hosting or splitting their email and web hosting up, just like a lot of big companies would do. So they basically go, hey, my website isn't hosted at Google. My website is still hosted at Namecheap or Green Geeks or GoDaddy or 1&1 or whatever. But instead of putting my email there, we use G Suite for our email. So they set their MX records to Google, and then they set their A record to their traditional web host that's going to have file access. Yes.
Is that, when I was at SU, like all of a sudden our email was Microsoft.
Yep.
And another school demonstrated that from Google.
Yep.
And is that what you're talking about? That
Yes.
Back end? Okay.
Yeah. So if a school chose to switch from Microsoft to Google, what they would do is they would update their MX records. They would get everything set up at Google, and Google would be like, okay, I'm ready for your email. I have all your user accounts created. I'm ready to go. But the syr.edu domain says that the MX records go to Microsoft.com. So instead of when you send an email, the same thing happens when I go to google.com. My email client is going to say syr.edu. I have no idea who that is. So I'm going to go to my DNS records. I'm going to look at the name server. The name server is going to tell me that syr.edu has an MX record of Microsoft.com. So my email client is going to get that back and it's going to go, okay, Microsoft.com means 1.2.3.4. I'm going to send that email to 1.2.3.4. And so as soon as the that IP address comes back, the DNS system is done. It doesn't care if the email server is running. The DNS information never gets the email contents. The DNS system is just doing a translation. It's just doing a lookup. And it's going, okay, I never got the email. I don't want you to send the email to me. I just want to know who the email is going to. Okay, that's going, and they don't even care about the at part, the front part of the email. All they care about is what the domain name is. So DNS system gets the domain. They go, oh, that's 1.2.3.4. That gets sent back to your email client, and your email client then sends the email there.
So is this why there's like problems sometimes like setting up your like EDU emails on like your phone and stuff? It's like it's not.
It could be that the DNS is misconfigured. It could be an issue with the security or using a different port. It could be that the email server is set up wrong. But what happens here is when we go in and we set up our DNS, there's a lot of copying and pasting, right? So a lot of times you'll set up your web host and your web host will give you one of two instructions. They'll either go, we'll handle the DNS for you. You just change the name servers at whoever you registered the domain through, and we'll manage the DNS for you. Or they go, hey, we're only setting up your web hosting. We don't want to screw with whatever else you have set up. So here's this A record. Go to your web host, or I'm sorry, your registrar, and type in this A record. And sometimes there are a couple A records. And the reason for that is there's a fallback system. So if one of the A records doesn't work, your computer knows to go try a couple other ones. So that's the basis of the DNS system. So the kinds of records you have are A records for entering an IP address. Hey, google.com means 1.2.3.4. You have Cname records, so you can say, hey, blog.google.com actually points at google.medium.com. So someone else hosts this for me, go get whatever that is. You have the NS records, which are basically at your registrar side that are either pointing at the registrar and saying, we host your DNS, you can edit the DNS through us, or, hey, we're going to point this at someone else. You have MX records, and your MX records are going to tell your email where to go. And then you have things like TXT records.
Bingo.
Ah!
Oh, is that what we're supposed to be doing?
Congratulations for your new debugging buddy.
Okay, what are we supposed to be doing while you're talking?
If you hear the term, cross it off.
Oh, I wasn't paying attention. I didn't realize that was.
It's okay. I'm going to be saying a lot more of them.
Okay, so, there's two
Okay,
more
hold
dots,
on.
so now we're on.
There are two more dots. Yes, we're still playing.
Okay, so if it's on this list, just cross it off in your bingo?
Well, you're supposed to lay it out in some random fashion on the grid. And then once, you hear it, cross it off. If you get 5 in a row, yell bingo.
Okay. So I just pick any of these, okay.
Yep, just lay it out in whatever order you want. It doesn't, there's no bingo across it.
All right.
This is why we never go to a bingo hall.
What shape are we playing for?
Okay, what?
Okay, so You have the TXT records, and the point of the TXT records are basically, so it's like an open text field, right? And so there are times, the most clear example of this is Google Analytics won't work on your website until you prove that you own that domain. And the reason for that is they don't want you installing Google Analytics code on a website that you don't own and then getting all the usage information about it. So what Google Analytics does is it says, here's this TXT record. What we want you to do is dump this in your DNS. And it's purely informational. The computer doesn't care what's in the TXT records. You could put hello world in there if you wanted. But the point of the TXT records is that we can say, hey, go hit googleVerification.mydomain.com, and it's going to return this random string of numbers. And if that random string of numbers matches what we told you to put in there, we now have proof that you own that domain name. So that's the point of the TXT records. There are also some security precautions. One is called SPF.
Bingo.
I knew it was going to happen quickly. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
The second one always goes flat coverall.
The first one is called SPF, and that stands for sender. You think I would have these memorized by now. SPF stands for sender protection. SPF DNS. SPF stands for Sender Policy Framework. And the reason why that came up is they said, hey, all these emails are getting sent, but they're not always getting sent by your web host anymore. Sometimes you have, sometimes they get sent by your web host, right? If I go open up my email client and send it off. But there are other times that other people send email on my behalf, right? So think about MailChimp. MailChimp is or SendGrid or Mailgun, or there are a bunch of services out there that basically send emails for you. So what if I use MailChimp to send out marketing emails to a mailing list of 1,000 people? What I want to do is prove that whoever is sending those emails is authorized on my behalf, because it's also possible for spammers to go, hey, look, I'm maxmatthews.com. So I'm going to send an email as maxmatthews.com. So what SPF does is it gives you a place in your DNS to say, here are the people who are allowed to send emails for me. And if anyone sends an email and says that it's coming from maxmatthews.com, go look at my SPF record. And if that, whoever's sending that email on my behalf is not in my SPF record, you know it's spam. You know they're not actually sending the email for me. The other part of that is a system called DKIM, D-K-I-M. And what DKIM is going to do is it's going to embed a hidden part, the headers of my email. It's going to have an encryption key in it. And what my mail client is going to do is it's going to open up that that email, look at the DKIM record, and go look at my DNS. And you go, hey, hey MZM, hey maxmatthews.com, what's your DKIM record? We want to make sure that whatever the hash was, whatever the password was put into this email, matches what your DNS says it should. And if it matches that, we now know that that's an email that you sent and wasn't sent by someone else just pretending to be you. Last record type that I can think of off the top of my head is Quadruple A, I'm sorry, Quadruple A. No, you don't get double bingo. And what AAA records do is it's the equivalent of an A record, except it uses the IPv6 system. So about 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, the very smart people who run the internet looked at IP addresses and they went, oh God, we're running out of IP addresses. Because back in the 70s, when the IP address system was agreed upon, maybe the early 80s, they went, there's no way that there's ever going to be 200 million, 300 million people on the internet. There's just no way. Well, sure enough, there are now millions and millions of people on the internet. And so everyone panicked and quickly came up with the system called IPv6. So when you see an IP address like 192.168.0.1 or 127.0.0.1, those are all IPv4 IP addresses, right? Well, they came up with this technology called NAT, Network Address Translation, which is how all routers work, which is Comcast or Spectrum or Fios or whoever my internet service provider is going to give me one IP address. And that's the only IP address that I get. But I have 50 different devices on my network at home, right? How does that work? So what they do is they cheat, and NAT uses ports. So it goes, okay, you got that one IP address. So if I go out and Google wants to send me some information, they're going to send it to my one Verizon IP address. But what my router is going to do is keep track of what port Google is sending that information to, and it's going to translate that to the IP address that's running on my network. So if you ever notice, you have an internal IP address and an external IP address, right? So if I look at my system preferences, my IP address on the Tech Garden network is 10.10.60.113. IP addresses that start with 10 or 192 mean that they're internal IP addresses. So only people in my local network can see my IP address of 10.10.60.113. But if I go on the internet and go to whatismyip.com, they're going to tell me my IP address is 209.217.218.34. And if any of you go to whatismyipaddress.com, you'll notice that you have a different local or internal IP address, but you have a different public IP address. And the same public IP address as me, because the router at Tech Garden is doing that work and is keeping track of the internal IP addresses and the public IP addresses. Okay, so quadruple A records are the same as A records, except they use IPv6. IPv6 is a technology that's been around for at least 5 years now. I'm thinking closer to 10. It's been very slow to get adopted because it adds a lot of complexity to the networking layer for IT people. So while it will be used down the road, it's very rare to see quadruple A records being used in companies that aren't ginormous, like Google or Microsoft or Apple or places like that. Okay, I am going to cheat and look to make sure I covered everything. Okay, there's one more term that I want to cover, and then what we're going to do is we're going to use a domain name that I have. Buying a domain name is not hard. It's like buying anything else online. You do a search for what you want. You double check the spelling. You get up, you walk around the room, you come back 2 minutes later, and you make sure the spelling of that domain name is right. Don't ask me how I've made that mistake before and bought a several $100 domain that was spelled incorrectly. You buy the domain, put in your credit card information, and normally it can take 24 to 48 hours for that domain name to become active. It really depends what registrar you buy it from. If you buy it from a big one like Namecheap or Google Domains or any of the major ones, it tends to be an automated process and tends to start working right away. Sometimes it doesn't, however, and that's because of DNS propagation a lot of times. So,
Bingo.
all right, bingo is now over. We're closing the room.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I have a whole bag of rubber ducks at home, though, so I will think of more games for us to play. You'd be surprised how cheap a 100 bag of rubber ducks is.
Riley will probably eat this. Thank you in advance.
I would be careful because that's small enough to swallow, but they do squeak.
Oh yeah, I know all the things that squeak in my house.
what happens is sometimes you change your DNS, right? Sometimes you go, oh, I'm switching web hosts, or I'm changing my email, or I'm setting up a new subdomain, so I need to add a new DNS record. Well, when you do that, what happens is that DNS needs to propagate all over the world. So the granddaddy of a CDN, of the content delivery network, was DNS. And the reason for that is because when I go to google.com, I don't want to have to go all the way across to California, where Google is headquartered, to figure out where google.com is. So just because my name server might be in California, the DNS system goes and asks all the name servers around the world, hey, give me your information. I'm going to cache this. I'm going to store this on my local DNS. And so there are things called root DNS servers, and then there are nodes of those DNS servers. And a lot of times your web host will have their own DNS servers that go to the parent or root DNS servers and go, hey, give me all the DNS information in the world. And I'm going to store that locally. And so when you go and you are working for a client, and then you go, okay, I'm pushing your website live. We're going to switch your DNS from whatever web host you were using over to the new web host. They're going to go to google.com, or they're going to go to, mylocalbusiness.com, and it's going to have the old website up. And they're going to go, well, I thought you said you changed it. Well, I did. And then you go on your computer and you go to, mylocalbusiness.com, and it loads up and it's the right site. You go, I don't know what's wrong. It's working on mine. Well, what happens is whoever their DNS host is hasn't updated the record yet. And so sometimes it takes 24 to 48 hours for DNS to fully propagate. Well, when you're learning how to set up DNS, that can be infuriating, because if you set up the DNS wrong, there's no one looking over your shoulder and going, good job, you did it right, that's all right. So I didn't know about DNS propagation when I started configuring websites, and I was working for a realtor, and that realtor told me that every email that I lose $1 million sale. And I want to switch over my email hosting to Google. Well, I made the switch over to Google, and it wasn't working. I would send them an email, and the email wouldn't go to Google, and it would go to the old web host. And I would panic, and I go, oh my God, I don't know what's wrong here. Well, what was happening was it was just taking time for that DNS propagation to happen. So when someone sent an email, half the time it would go to the old server because the DNS propagated maybe at Comcast, but it didn't propagate over to the people using Fios or Spectrum or whatever. And so half the emails were going to the old place, half the emails were going to the new place. So it's important to remember that when we set up DNS, sometimes it takes an hour or two for that, or all the way up to 2 full days for that DNS to propagate. Okay, so I'm going to dive in. Most of my domains I have registered. I have to share my screen, and let me just do, okay. So I am going to go to Zoom. I'm going to share desktop 1. Okay, so most of my domains are hosted at Google. Namecheap and Google Domains are my two go-tos for domain registration. That's just who I like. And what we're going to do is we're going to play around with my maxmatthews.dev domain. So right now, my DNS records, if I go to DNS, it says use the Google domain name servers, right? And we see that it's pointing at nscloud-a1.googledomains.com. And the reason why you see 4 of them here is because if one of your name servers goes offline, your domain goes offline. There's no way for your computer to know that maxmatthews.dev actually goes over here for web hosting. So web hosts have gotten smart about that and said, here are 4 of them. So if you go ask nscloud-a1.googledomains what maxmatthews.dev's a record for their IP addresses, and it times out or it doesn't return the information, go look at A2, A3, or A4. And we're going to make sure that whenever you update your DNS records on our domains.google.com, it's also going to update on all 4 of these servers. So if one of them goes down, we have fallbacks, we have backups. So I'm going to scroll down here. And what I have set up is if I go to website, you see that I have a domain name forward set up, right? And so basically right now, if we go to maxmatthews.dev, it redirects me to the domain that I primarily use, which is maxmatthews.ws. If anyone would like inspiration for a personal website, by the way, I have invested hours into this. And every time you refresh it, you get a different background. And the background styling, that material design also matches my business cards. And it also matches my resume as well. So I have spent a lot of time on personal branding. So if anyone would like to draw inspiration, or this code is all on GitHub. So if you would like to fork this code from GitHub and type in your name instead, you're totally welcome to do that.
Wow. That just seems wrong.
It's Max Matthews, but instead of my full name spelled out, it's .ws. Sure, yep, I will. Which is why I also have maxmatthews.dev and mzm.tech and mzmtech.com and a couple other of them.
Now, are these all different websites, or they will all take you to the same website?
For the most part, they all take me to my primary personal website. I do have a business website because I have an LLC set up. So it's just a very basic placeholder site that's like, hey, I own mzmtech.com. But all the other ones do redirect me to this maxmatthews.ws. It's a great link to send, or when you're using the email address, it's cool that it's just my name. Very hard to tell people maxmatthews.ws. So like, what WS and again, I get that response all the time. So that's why I go, oh, just go to maxmatthews.dev. People are like, oh, maxmatthews.dev, I can remember that one. So right now I have my NS, my name servers pointed at Google. And the reason I have that is because all I want to do is have my website forward set up, right? Now, if I were to do my own web hosting, like if I wanted to get WordPress set up on this maxmatthews.dev domain, I would use something called Cloudflare. So what Cloudflare is DNS on steroids. They offer all kinds of really cool stuff where they basically say, if you point your DNS at us, we will be a middleman between your registrar and your actual web hosting. And we're going to offer all kinds of really cool features like free SSL certificates. Or you might go, SSL, what do I care about SSL? Well, SSL is how you get HTTPS to show up on your website. So if you notice, there's a little lock here, right? And if I go to my website, you notice that there's a little, oh, that scared me for a second. You notice that there is a little lock up here. And if I click on that, it says connection is secure. Would any of you like to throw out one of your personal domains?
Sure, you go to cal.dev.
So cal.dev is set up properly. And the reason why it's set up properly is because a lot of end users are not going to type in HTTPS. And so you have this set up through Netlify?
Yeah, I have a Gatsby site running through Netlify hosted by Hubbard.
Okay. I have heard both Netlify and Netlify, and I don't know which is, but what is happening here is that notice I didn't type in HTTPS. I just went to your domain and it automatically went, there's a secure website available. I'm going to go load that code. A lot of websites are configured not to do that. So I'm trying to think of,
I have one that configured properly if you want to.
Sure.
Okay, techoverlay.com. This is the one where I had them strip the WordPress.
Okay.
And now I'm just back to whatever the heck they just.
Okay, so if we look at this site, we see not secure shows up here, right? And a lot of your end users are going to get on this website and go, not secure. Oh, I want to click off this immediately. Obviously, there's nothing up here. It's not a big deal. But what ends up happening is you go, well, it's okay. You just went on my website to get the business hours, right? Like, that's not secure information. That's public. Well, they go, oh, well, your website's not secure. I wanted to get off it. And so browsers have gotten more and more aggressive about showing that it's not secure. The next version of Chrome is supposed to make this not secure actually show up in red. And if you have if you had a form on this page, like a contact us, Chrome would get really, really cranky. And it would go, whoa, you're sending some information here that's not encrypted. There are even some top-level domains. A top-level domain is a .com, .net, .dev, .ws, whatever it is. That's called a TLD, or top-level domain. Should have put that one on there. So a top-level domain, some of the newer ones, especially the ones bought by Google, like .dev, require HTTPS. So if you don't have your website properly configured for HTTPS, they just won't let it work at all. Yeah.
So I purchased the HTTPS. So you're saying that if it's not properly configured, someone would have to manually type HTTPS?
Yeah. So let's see. There are multiple ways to not have HTTPS properly configured.
It's not going to show up, but before I had them strip WordPress, I was able to type HTTPS and still see my website, but I don't want to have to do both.
Right. So there are things called HTTPS rewrites or HTTPS preload and HSTS. So what HSTS is an agreed upon standard that your name is configured with your name server, and basically says, hey, the first time you load techoverlay.com, don't do anything. But just an FYI, I'm telling your browser that we do have HTTPS. So next time you load this page, the browser is automatically going to go to HTTPS for you. And the browser stores a very long list of domain names that you have accessed. And every time it accesses a domain name, it goes, hey, techoverlay.com, do you happen to have a HSTS configured? And it goes, yes, I do. And so it comes back and it goes, great. Because you have HSTS configured, that means I know you have HTTPS. So every time I go to your site, I'm just going to load that HTTPS for you.
So what do I
Max, can I say something?
happen, or is this something that will happen eventually?
We're going to go through how to set it up with Cloudflare. Cloudflare is not required, but the reason I use them on all of my websites, anywhere that I have a non-redirect, I use Cloudflare. Their free package is good for most users. They have all kinds of other goodies baked into that. We are only going to go through the terms that I have listed here, but you're welcome to go through once you have it set up there, go through there. There are also other ways of setting it up. So if you contact the tech support through whoever your host was, they will help you configure your HTTPS certificate. Back in the day, you had to buy an HTTPS certificate. However, there's a great organization called Let's Encrypt who offers free HTTPS certificates. It used to be a pain in the ass to configure that, to get HTTPS working, because they wanted 4 or 5 different different kinds of proof that you own the domain name. But once there was some money thrown behind Let's Encrypt by Google, by Mozilla, by Microsoft, there's a very long list of very big company names that have donated money to Let's Encrypt. Now all of a sudden, all these web hosts are getting on board and going, yeah, we'll support Let's Encrypt. Yeah, we'll let you get a free SSL certificate.
Can
So
I
Let's
say
Encrypt
something?
is awesome. It makes it so you don't need to pay for an SSL certificate. SSL certificates are the only way you can get HTTPS working on your domain name, which is definitely important and is now becoming a standard. Cloudflare offers them to you for free, and does all the configuration for you as well. Yeah.
What does the secure certificate do for me?
The secure certificate is basically the technology behind the HTTPS and is what lets the browser communicate with your web server securely and prove that there is encryption going on between your web server and the browser itself. So the certificate is essentially a very long password that gets sent from your web server that the browser uses to send information back and forth.
Okay, and without it, the sending of information, anything could happen.
Correct. It's not
Okay.
secure. So
It's not secure.
So if Time Warner Cable or Spectrum wanted to see the contents of the data that you were sending, they could do that. And if your server was out in California, any hop along the way, right? So the tech garden could have a bad access point set up by a hacker that could go in and access your information. So if you notice, any bank website that you go to, of course, has HTTPS set up and has for years. They're now getting to the point that now that HTTPS is free to set up with Let's Encrypt, more and more browsers are pushing every website to not only support HTTPS, but to redirect the users to it. So if I go to techoverlay.com, instead of just going to techoverlay.com, I'm going to get redirected to https.techoverlay.com before my web server even has a chance to send some data non-securely. Okay, all doing all right? Gonna try and shoot for a break at 7. But what I want to do is I want to change my my DNS records here. What I want to do is I want to tell Google Domains, instead of looking at your own name servers and having their own records there, I want to set up my Google domain to point to Cloudflare. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to cloudflare.com. It is free to sign up. I already have an account, so I'm going to sign in. Going to two-factor in. Two-factor is super important to set up. If you don't have it set up on your account, see if it's an option and set it up. Not just on Cloudflare, on all of your accounts. It's super important. I have had passwords compromised. I use a random password on every service. However, if I have my password compromised, they try and get into my account. You know, something gets hacked, whatever. They try and sign in. They get to the two-factor screen, and because they don't have my phone, they're not able to access my account, even though they have my username and password. And because two-factor codes change every 30 seconds, there's no way of them cracking that server. Even though they stole my password, there's no way of them knowing what my two-factor code is going to be. Super important. Definitely recommend you set it up. Okay, so I have a couple domains set up here. I'm going to add a site, and it says what domain is it do you want to use. So I'm going to say maxmatthews.dev. I'm going to add the site. And what Cloudflare is going to do is it's going to go out and it's going to say, hey, Google, tell me what all the current DNS records are. Because when I change the name server, when pointed at Cloudflare, I don't want my whole site to break. So what Cloudflare is going to do is it's going to go out, it's going to get all the DNS records, and it's going to copy them in. So when I change the name server from Google to Cloudflare, if someone goes to maxmatthews.dev, it's still going to work because Cloudflare is going to say, oh, whatever you had at Google, I will respond to that as well. So I'm going to hit next. Of course, they're going to want to sell me on their most expensive plan, which is $200 a month. I have had a couple clients use the Pro plan. It does have some firewall optimization, firewall security. You get to use page rules, which are a super easy way of not having to do DNS and use an interface. They do some optimization of your code. However, for most people, especially just getting started, the free plan is fine. So I'm going to say one free plan. and it says, here are all the records that we have set up for you. And it pulled in some MX records, right, that are pointing at Google, and Google's going to forward the email for me. It's saying www points to Google as well. And then here are the A records. Here are what my server is pointing to. I'm actually going to clear all of these out because we're going to start from scratch. Except maybe one A record, because DNS gets really cranky if you have no record set up. And I promise I'm going to stop explaining so much and start doing more. So they are saying, hey, get rid of these old ones. We don't need these anymore, and change A1 and A2 to these Cloudflare ones. With DNS, you start falling in love with your copy and paste, because DNS is all about copying information that your one server is telling you and pasting it in somewhere else. So I'm going to say use custom name servers. I'm going to add my first Cloudflare server. I'm going to add my second one. And it says, okay, that's fine. Ignore that, won't normally come up. I have mine set up pretty securely. So it's saying, hey, your domain name might break until we have a chance to propagate all these records through. So I change my name server. I'm going to refresh the page. It definitely has those in there. And if I go and go, oh, wait, I want to change where my website's forwarding to, I'm going to go to website, and it's going to warn me, hey, your name servers are no longer pointing at Google. So we don't have control over your email, over any of that. We're just going to go to Cloudflare, and we're going to send whatever user wants to load maxmatthews.dev, send them over to Cloudflare. I have had domain registrars before that do not give me that warning. And so I change my name server, I forget about it, I come back here 3 years later, I want to go set up an email forward or a website redirect or a new subdomain. I add it in there, I think I'm fine, I wait 48 hours for the DNS propagation, and I go, why is that not working? So I go in there and I'm trying to debug it. The name servers are the granddaddy of all DNS records. If the name servers are pointing somewhere else, doesn't matter what you have set up at your registrar. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to say continue. And it's going to, again, Cloudflare's given me the instructions. Remove these name servers, put these new ones in there, save your changes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say recheck. I'm going to say, hey, Cloudflare, I did that. Now, what Cloudflare is going to do is it's going to let me play around in here, but it's going to give me a warning. It's going to say, until we have confirmed that your name server records are actually updated and configured properly, things might not be accurate in here, or things that you changed might not work. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to DNS, and I'm going to scroll down. My records are here. This is where we're going to be spending a lot of time. But I want to go down to my DNS sec. This is all about encryption. This is all about every single step of the DNS system being secure. So if we go back to our picture, the first step of getting the DNS record is saying, hey, Google.com, what does Google.com resolve to? Well, Google.com needs to go between Google domains and Cloudflare. Cloudflare is going to send back that Google.com is equal to 1.2.3.4. So the first step of the encryption is to make sure that Cloudflare and my registrar are going to communicate over an encrypted method. That is what we use DNSSEC for. Very few people have DNSSEC set up. The reason for that is there aren't a ton of attacks happening between techoverlay.com and your registrar, Google domains, or whoever it is, right? However, there have been attacks that have happened where an attacker has been able to get in between Google domains and my web and the Google web servers and change the fact that Google.com isn't actually pointing at 1.2.3.4. It's actually pointing at 4.5.5.6.7. And because it's pointing there, now I go into Google, I sign into my Google account. Now I'm communicating with a completely different server. So what DNSSEC is going to do is it's going to encrypt the leg between my registrar and my DNS host. Yes.
When I go to the domain that I got,
Yep.
it says DNS unsigned. I haven't done anything.
So that just means it's turned off.
Okay.
Yep. So what we're going to do is we're going to enable our DNSSEC. And what it's going to do is it's going to tell all the servers at Cloudflare, hey, turn on DNSSEC. So it doesn't matter if I hit the Cloudflare server in California or in Virginia, everyone knows that they should be communicating with Google domains only over an encrypted channel. So I am now going to go to my Google domains. And because this is such a rare feature, there are some smaller registrars that don't support it. Cloudflare is one of the few that does support encrypted DNSSEC on their side. And even a lot of web hosts will do this as well. DNSSEC is not required if you're using the name servers at your domain, at your registrar. Because your registrar and the name servers are the same company, there's really no reason to use a DNSSEC. However, if you have the option to turn it on, even if you are using name servers at the same place as your registrar, I would encourage you to do so. So I'm going to scroll down here. And basically, there's a bunch of information that Google needs to know of how Cloudflare wants to manage the encryption. So I'm going to open this in 2 tabs. And I'm going to go to my Google DNS. And the first thing they want is the key tag. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to copy the key tag and I'm going to paste it in. And then they want to know what algorithm Cloudflare uses. So it says algorithm 13. So I'm going to pick in the drop down and go to algorithm 13. And then they want to know what the digest type is, right? We don't really need to know what all of these mean under the hood, but basically what we're telling it is how Google domains should encrypt the connection between Google and Cloudflare. And then the last thing they want to know is the digest, right? Like what's the password essentially that we're going to use to prove that Cloudflare is sending some encrypted information. So we're going to hit add there. Oops, I copied something wrong, the key tag. And I'm going to hit add. And Google now saved that. And they go, okay, now anything that we do to talk between Cloudflare and Google domains is going to be encrypted. So I'm going to hit confirm. And basically what Cloudflare is going to do is say, we're not going to start using that encryption until we check Google and Google proves to us that they have the right information. Because if they don't, and we turn it on, anytime you go to maxmatthews.dev, it's going to blow up. So we want to make sure that you have this set up properly. So we now have our DNSSEC set up properly. The other thing that we want to do is we want to tell Cloudflare that we want to use HTTPS. So fortunately for us, Cloudflare manages all the certificates for us, at least between Cloudflare and the end user, right? So what's going to happen is the end user is going to go through go maxmatthews.dev, Google is going to go to Cloudflare, Cloudflare is going to get the fact that maxmatthews.dev points at my web host, which is GreenGeeks, and it's going to send it back to the client. When the client goes, oh, okay, I want to go connect to your web host. I want to go connect to GreenGeeks. Cloudflare is a little different. Cloudflare is going to be a middleman. Not many DNS records work like this, but what Cloudflare is going to do is it's going to route all the traffic through the Cloudflare network, go to my web host, get the data, bring it back through the Cloudflare network, and act as kind of a CDN for us. So it's going to bring it back through the Cloudflare network, and then that website, when it gets returned to the end user, it's going to have HTTPS tagged on top of it. So what's going to happen is our website is going to be accessible over HTTPS because Cloudflare is providing an SSL certificate for us. So we have a couple options here. In Cloudflare, we are going to say, always use HTTPS. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, even if a user requests a website over HTTP, redirect them to HTTPS. We're also going to turn on HSTS, which is stands for HTTP Strict Transport Security, and that's the list that I was telling you about earlier. That says, instead of waiting for the user to load our website and redirect them to HTTPS, tell their browser using using HSTS that we have HTTPS set up. And whenever they go and load our site, even if they don't load it over HTTPS, under the hood, before you even make the request, go get it over HTTPS. So I'm going to turn on HSTS. I'm going to enable it. What I'm going to do is the browser wants to know how long are we guaranteeing that that website has HSTS. So even though Cloudflare recommends 6 months, I'm going to set it all the way up to 12. And we're going to see why in a second. So I'm going to set it up to 12. I'm going to tell it that every one of my subdomains has HTTPS as well. I'm going to tell it that it can preload that information. So basically, it can the browser can save that information in a very long list of all the websites. And the no sniff I'm going to turn on. That doesn't matter too much. So I'm going to hit save. And now HSTS is configured. Now, about that preload thing, it's great that the first time I load my site, we're going to tell the browser that I have TTPS set up. That's what the HSTS is. And it's great that we can tell Cloudflare, hey, before you even send any HTTP content, redirect them to HTTPS. That's all great. But wouldn't it be great if we could tell the browser, Chrome, Firefox, all of those, hey, before you even try and load the site, before you even go talk to Cloudflare, I want to be in a list of sites that have HTTPS configured. And that is what is called preload. So there is a very long list of all these websites that support HTTPS. And so if I do a search for preload list, the first Google response is going to be hstspreload.org. And basically, I'm going to type in maxmatthews.dev, and I've already set up this on my domain. So I've already added this to the list. But if you type in a domain that is not on the preload list, what it's going to do is it's going to have you check off a box that says, hey, I own this domain. I'm not adding someone else to this list. I actually have, I'm the owner of this. But it's also going to have you set up, it's also going to check, and it's going to say, hey, are you guaranteeing that you have HTTPS set up on your website for 12 months? Because if you don't have that, and you turn off your HTTPS for some reason, your site's going to break because Chrome is going to only want to load your site and all the other browsers over HTTPS. So we want to make sure that you're guaranteeing that you're going to have HTTPS for 12 months. We also want to make sure that you have this on all of your subdomains because we want to load every subdomain over HTTPS as well. So if it is properly configured, it will give you checkboxes. You check off a couple things, you hit submit, and it says, congratulations, you're now on the list. Whenever Chrome updates the list, you will be on it. So this is a process that can take a couple months, but is a good thing to do on your domain. So if we type in the domain techoverlay.com, it's going to check Tech Overlay, and it's going to say, we can't get to your website over HTTPS, so there's no way we're adding you to the list that says always use HTTPS. once we configure that with Cloudflare and point the name servers over there and get the HSTS turned on the Cloudflare side, it would allow you to add it to the list here. Okay, so we have that turned on. That is securing the encryption, the encryption between Google domains and Cloudflare. Now what we want to do is let's check my website. So I'm going to go to https://maxmatthews.dev, and it loaded fine. The reason it loaded fine is because I still have an A record in here. So I'm going to clear that out. It's going to probably save no DNS records. I'm going to close this. I'm going to go to maxmatthews.dev. It still loads fine. The reasoning behind that is because the propagation hasn't happened yet. So my website still thinks that my name server is over at Google. And so it goes, oh, I'll just look at the Google domain names, and that's coming back to point to redirect you. So we're still waiting for the propagation to happen. But while that's happening, we want to set up the new domain name records. We want to point Cloudflare at my web host, because I use a web host called GreenKeeps. And so what I want to do is I want to set up a server there that is going a domain on my new web host that is going to host a WordPress site for us. So I know I'm 3 minutes early. I'm going to take a break there before I dive into GreenKeeps. And from here, we are going to set up a WordPress site. We're going to get our WordPress site working at our new domain. And then we're going to look at encryption between Cloudflare and my web host. And then we're going to set up email as well.
I want to show you something.
Sure.
a good flowers and a good fun.
All right. So I talked way too much, but we do have our Google domain now pointing at Cloudflare. So now we need to go next steps, right? So now we need to get Cloudflare connected to my web host. So I lied. My web hosting is not through Green Geeks. It used to be. My web hosting is currently through Namecheap themselves. If you are looking for a web host, definitely recommend Green Geeks. Namecheap is good as well. I think they were a little cheaper, or I think maybe I wanted my hosting to be at the same place as all my domain names. With that said, there are a lot of bad web hosts out there and a lot of bad domain registrars out there. So while you don't have to use the one that I am recommending, just make sure you have talked to someone, and more importantly, talk to someone who is technical, because I've gotten recommendations for domain names and web hosts that ended up being horrible. And the reason was because someone else set up their website for them, and their website's on the internet, and they just go on their merry way and they go, oh yeah, my website's hosted with so-and-so. I've never had any problems with them. And then you look on their website and they're paying $20 a month. And you're like, why are you paying $20 a month? And they're like, because I got a good deal on it. And I'm like, well, you know, web hosting's like $4-ish a month. And they're like, yeah, but I get 5 email accounts included with my web hosting. And I go, well, my web host has unlimited email accounts included. And they go, oh, well, how'd you find them? Well, there are 40 different web hosts that have that good. But you know what? Just because they found GoDaddy, they set up with GoDaddy, and that's what they use. So it is a common thing when I start working with clients. I haven't done a lot of client work because I work full time. But when I was doing client work, the first thing I would do is transfer people away from GoDaddy, transfer people away from one-and-one, just because they're the big name in the room and they know it. And so they rather spend money on marketing than they would on tech features and making their tech actually performing. Not to mention their customer service is just horrible. Okay, so I'm going to go to my web hosting. I could sign in through, I could sign in through Namecheap. I just happen to know the domain to get in directly. And you notice that it says cPanel up here. Every web host I have ever seen except GoDaddy themselves uses cPanel. cPanel is the huge name in the industry. If you sign into Hostinger and get into where you actually manage your email, I would be shocked if they weren't using cPanel or some skin of cPanel. This is kind of the de facto name in the industry, and the reason behind this is they have software called WHM, Web Host Manager, and Web Host Manager is made so whoever your web host is, Namecheap or Green Geeks or whoever, can go in and manage all of the individual cPanel licenses, right? So I have a cPanel account on premium14.webhosting.com. But there are probably 100 or 1,000 other websites hosted on premium14.webhosting.com. And so cPanel is just the de facto name. Sometimes it won't say cPanel on it, and it will have Namecheap up in the corner. But at the end of the day, it's cPanel technology lying under the hood. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the domain in my cPanel so cPanel knows, hey, maxmatthews.dev is going to be coming in here. So I'll just do a quick search for domains. And I'm going to create a new domain called maxmatthews.dev. And I'm going to uncheck this share document route with mzamtech.com because I don't want maxmatthews.dev to point at the files that mzamtech.com is hosting. So it's going to go, okay, well, if you don't want it to share, where do you want to put it? And I'm going to put it right in maxmatthews.dev. That's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. And cPanel or Namecheap gets cranky with me. And they go, whoa, we need proof that you own maxmatthews.dev before we let you host it. So we're going to do the TXT record. So we are going, it wants me to point this hosting DCV subdomain at this text record. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and go back to my Cloudflare DNS and change my A record type to a text record. And it's saying, okay, what subdomain do you want this text record on? And I'm going to say hosting-DCV. And then it's going to say, what do you want the content of the text record to be? And I'm going to grab this and I'm going to put it in my DNS and I'm going to hit save. And then I'm going to hit add record. And so what Cloudflare is going to say is, okay, whenever someone asks for hosting DCV and specifically asks for a TXT record, go ahead and send that value back. So when I go in here and I say begin validation, cPanel just brings me back to this page. But if I go to my domains, I should be able to find, no, of course, I can't find it yet. So I'm going to give that a second. Go back to my domains. Not there, so I'm going to try it one more time.
Max, I'm gonna need you to help me with this at a later date.
Okay.
This is a lot.
Okay.
I'm like lost.
This is very much a lot, and I don't expect anyone to get this on the first time. Why do you think I'm cheating off my bingo sheet to make sure that I'm covering all of this stuff? I did prepare for this class by making bingo. It is a lot, and the whole idea of me recording this is that you guys can hit the pause button and go set this up on your own domains.
So we're on the same page.
And a lot of this stuff is overkill, right? HSTS is not a requirement. HTTPS most of the time is not a requirement. But the idea is just to throw this at you guys. So it's somewhere in the back of your head, and when you go, oh, MX records, I know that's a DNS thing, and I know that it has to do with email. I forget where I put it. I forget if that's at my domain or at Cloudflare or wherever. I just know somewhere in the back of my head that MX has to do with email. Okay, so it's saying that it's set up. So if I go to maxmatthews.dev, I go to my site. Well, that's not right. I don't want the redirect to work. I want to see my web host. So I'm going to try and go incognito. Incognito is a great developer trick to basically say ignore the cache, right? So it's not just for your nefarious web browsing activities. You can also go incognito, and it won't pull from the cache.
But I actually should be.
So I'm going to.
I don't know, it's
Just
just
of a certain age.
So I'm going to try and load my page, and it's still redirecting me. So I believe the DNS propagation hasn't gone through all the way yet, which is somewhat normal for it to take this long. And if we look here, even even Cloudflare is showing me that it hasn't detected that the change has happened yet. So I'm going to hit recheck now. Okay, and it's still saying you already did this less than an hour ago. So we're still going to give it some time. While we're here, we can plug along and just hope that things haven't broken anywhere else along the process. So what I'm going to do is installing WordPress. They have something called the famous 5-minute install, where basically you upload a zip into FTP. FTP is the standard for uploading files from your local computer up into your web host. So you upload all these files, then you have to go in and create a database by hand. And you create the database with your web host as well. Most web hosting does include a free MySQL database, if not a couple of them. WordPress almost exclusively works with MySQL as their backend database. And then what you do is you copy all the information that you put in when you create the database. You go hit the file on your web server, then you type that information into the WordPress form, and WordPress installs it for you. While a 5-minute install is great, I prefer 30-second installs. So most cPanels have this built in. If you don't, or you're setting up in some kind of other web host, you will have to follow the WordPress documentation to install. But if we scroll down at the very bottom, or near the very bottom, I lied. At the very bottom, there's this thing called Soft-Calist or Soft-Delicious or whatever you want to. Soft-Taculous, sure. They have this thing called WordPress for me. I don't have to download WordPress. I don't have to set up the database. I don't have to connect them together. I'm just going to click on WordPress.
You're on cpanel.net?
No, I have to, in order to access my cPanel, I need to go to wherever I bought the web hosting and then click on cPanel. So I'm going to click on install here, and it's going to say, okay, what do you want to install? Do you want to install an older version of WordPress? Do you want to install the current one? I'm going to say I want to install the current one. I want my protocol to be HTTPS, and I am going to pick my maxmatthews.dev domain. Then I'm going to scroll down here. My blog is fine. My WordPress blog is fine. Definitely change admin and pass. This is the #1 vulnerability people have on their WordPress sites, is they don't change it. Drew's laughing because he knows how many people actually do it. I have gotten clients before that hired another professional website developer. I've gone on their WordPress site. I inspect element. I see WP dash something in their HTML or CSS links, or I'm sorry, JavaScript or CSS links. I go, oh, well, this might be a WordPress site. So what do? I go to their website and I do /WP-login. And sure enough, their login page pops right up, which normally would be no problem, right? If they have it secured, username and password, doesn't matter if that's accessible. I type in admin, and for the password, I type in password 123456 or admin. I get right in. I now have complete edit access to their website. And so what I have done, back in the day, a younger version of me would go on their website, go into their footer, and say, you've been hacked. And then I would call them up and I'd go, by the way, your web developer is pretty crappy because I just edited your website. And so they scroll to the bottom and they would see the message, and I would get them as a client, or they would threaten to call the cops on me and find out that I hadn't done anything illegal. So, yes, it was not how I get clients anymore, but back in the day.
So you're saying you would not recommend that for us to do, right?
No, I'm not recommending that you guys do that. But it is an interesting way to, if you're looking at someone else's site, I wouldn't encourage you to attempt to log into it. But a lot of websites, you can go to /WP-admin and get into their site. I know that WordPress hasn't necessarily been covered in the course, and it is the most widely used web framework. It is called a CMS, a content management system. And the reason why it's so popular is when you build a website in WordPress for a client, the client can go in and edit the content on the website without having to edit your HTML, which doesn't sound important until you have that client that calls you every couple days and goes, hey, can you make this edit? Hey, can you make this edit? Oh, I just need this little thing changed. And 9 times out of 10, it is legitimately a little change. It's not a styling thing. It's not a new element or a new page. They literally just want the ability to edit it. Yeah.
But does WordPress have to completely take over when we install it? Because what I wanted to do was I wanted to have my own custom dashboard, and then I just wanted WordPress for my blog.
So the short answer is yes, it does need to completely take over. It is very hard to configure WordPress that's on the same domain to run alongside something else. What is not difficult to do is have WordPress run on a subdomain that is different from the primary domain. So if you made your website blog.tech.com, then that would be fine because it's on a separate subdomain. It's just when they are sharing the same domain. It is possible to do it with subdirectories. It just gets a lot hairier. And you'll notice a lot of people do this. If you know, Google themselves has blog.google.com. Subdomains are easier to separate out your code than directories are. So, you know, mydomain.com/blog is going to be harder than blog.mydomain.com. Okay, I am going to hide my password here because I am screen sharing, and I am going to make that very secure. Don't worry, I will be deleting this later tonight, so you don't have to worry. Putting in an admin email is important, one that actually will get to you because password resets go there and a couple other things. So if you really screw up your configuration, it's worthwhile having this admin in here. I don't really need any of this stuff. Setting up a cache that uses WordPress is helpful down the road, but we're not diving too much into WordPress. I just want to get the site up. And you know, we're focusing on DNS. Doesn't matter what theme that I use. So I'm just going to hit install. And it says it's going to take 3 to 4 minutes. Don't hold your breath, or do hold your breath because it's done already. So I'm now going to go incognito again, and I'm going to go to maxmatthews.dev. I'm going to spell it right. And we get site cannot be reached. So different error, so we should celebrate, right? So what's happening here is it's not redirecting me back. So that means my DNS is updated. So I'm going to go back to Cloudflare. And I'm going to refresh the page. And it says, great news, Cloudflare is now protecting your site. So they are serving my website for me. So while I'm in here, I'm going to put this into development mode. And the reason I want to do that is Cloudflare is going to cache the website for me. So basically, they're going to say, hey, instead of constantly going to your web server, which is only in one part of the country, we're going to go to your website once. We're going to go to that web server. We're going to pull the content, and we're going to store it on all of our web servers across the globe, right? And we're going to act like a content delivery network does. However, that doesn't work great if I want to constantly be seeing the latest version of my site. So I'm going to turn this on to development mode. And what that's going to do is Cloudflare is going to be like, we got it. We know that you don't want it pulling from our cache. So it may be more load on your web server because we're sending more people to it instead of pulling from our network. But you know, you can do that. You can bypass the cache. And it will automatically expire in 3 hours, which is good to note if you're working on a website extensively, that it automatically turns itself off, which is good for if you forget that you turned it on. But it can be really frustrating when you're refreshing your page 1,000 times and you're going, I'm clearly editing this code. Why is this code not showing up? It might be Cloudflare that's caching it. Okay, so now we need to tell Cloudflare, to go look at my web host. We need to tell Cloudflare that my A record for my root domain is going to be at a certain IP address. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go to my cPanel, and I am going to pop open the server information here. And the server information, I'm hoping, has of course it doesn't. Yeah, I think it's this. Has my IP address. So I'm going to copy this. When you buy web hosting, they'll send you an email and they'll tell you what DNS information to put into your web host or your DNS records to make it work. It's a little bit harder to find when after that initial email, but I'm pretty sure that's the right IP address. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back to my DNS. In here, I'm going to type in @ and the @ sign means the root, right? So like no subdomain. And notice Cloudflare is giving me all kinds of warnings here. So we should probably resolve them by the time we're done. So I'm going to put that in. I'm going to hit add record, and it added in my A record. And we got one of the errors to go away. So that's good. So I'm going to go back to maxmatthews.dev. And I still get site cannot be reached, but I'm going to go incognito, and I'm still, nope, I get my WordPress. And I can do /wp admin and get in. And I can do my super secure password, which I did change, by the way. And now I'm into my WordPress dashboard. And so I can get in here and I can go to pages, and we won't dive too far into WordPress, but I can edit one of the sample pages and change that to an exclamation point and go back to my site and go to that page, which is /sample page, I think. No, of course it's not. Let's do this instead. Let's go to the post and edit hello world. And update it, and then go back to here and go to my hello world post, and there it is. So we have WordPress set up, but there are some people. And notice I also have HTTPS set up as well. My site is secure. And the reason for that is because Cloudflare has set up SSL for me. And in fact, if we click on this, we can go into the certificate and it will show me that Cloudflare is the one who is providing the SSL for me. So I can go in here. Now, what if some people go to www.mydomain.com? So I'm going to go to www.maxmatthews.dev. And my browser is going to go to Google. Google is going to go to Cloudflare. That's all going to be encrypted over DNSSEC. It's going to say, hey, what's www.maxmatthews.dev equal? Don't know. Doesn't exist. So I'm going to go back to my Cloudflare, and I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to make a new CNAME. And what's the CNAME going to be? It's going to be www.mydomain.com. And what do we want it to point at? We want it to point at maxmatthews.dev. So basically, whatever this A record is pointing to is what we want the www to point to. So I'm going to add that as a record. And when I go to www.maxmatthews.dev, we get my WordPress site. So the other solution we could do for that is we could delete that and say, hey, the A record for www is also going to point at that same IP address, and this should also work. It does. The reason why I prefer to do the CNAME record for that is because if I ever change this A record and point it at a different web host, my www will also point at that new web host. So that's why I just choose to do a CNAME and point it at my root domain name. Okay, great. Now I want to send an email to max@maxmatthews.dev and get it. Well, right now, Cloudflare is warning us an MX record was not found on your root domain, and MX record is required to reach those domain name addresses, right? So the DNS records are going to be able to say, hey, I know where to find your website at. I don't know where to send an email to. So if I go back to my cPanel, I'm going to look at email accounts, and I'm going to create a new email account with maxmatthews.dev, and I'll make it max@maxmatthews.dev. And I will make my password seriously? Okay. And I will hit create. And now I created that email address, but I still need to set the MX records at my web host to tell it to send to my hosting. So in order to get them, this would normally be in the setup email as well. But I'm going to go to the DNS Zone Editor and see if hopefully, no, of course they're not here. Are they here? I'm going to go to another domain. That's not right either. I'm going to cheat and go to one of the other domains that I know I have email set up on. Or not. That was a crappy way of doing that. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. Nope, I'm going to go back to my domain, and I'm going to say, hey, the MX records. Now, normally you get multiple MX records, and the reason for that is you want to, if your one email server goes down, you still want to make sure you get the email on another server. So what I'm going to do is in here, it says, okay, what server do you want to use? And I'm going to type in the IP address of my server, but then it says priority. And when we get the email from our web host, it will list out the MX records, and then it will have priorities next to it. And it's common to see priorities as like 10, 20, 20, 30, 40. And what that's doing is it's telling the MX system what order it should try that. So if it sees something with priority 1, it's going to try that one first. And then if it sees something with priority 20 and priority 20, it's going to try either one of those. Those have the same level of priority, so it doesn't matter which one it tries first. It's not super important. It's just another thing to keep in mind that when you set up MX, it's not just the server. It's also the priority that your web host tells you to use. So I'm going to go ahead and save that in. And the domain, I'm going to make the root as well. And now that is set up. So in theory, we would normally be able to go to our cPanel and go to our email accounts. And in our email accounts, there will be this new one that I just created. And if we go into, I'm going to zoom out a little bit because I believe, no, still. I'm going to go to connect devices. And if we scroll down, it has all the settings that you would give your client, right? Or you would type into your email client yourself. So you would set the incoming mail server, the outgoing mail server. The ports are important to note. If you ever tell a client to use POP3 over IMAP, I will personally come and hunt you down. The issue with POP3 is it's a one-way sync. So when you delete an email on one device, it's not going to delete on the server, and therefore it's not going to delete on all the other devices. That may not seem like a big deal when when POP3 was created literally in the 1980s. But now that we have so many devices, when you delete an email on one device, you expect it to delete everywhere. So using IMAP is super important. Back in the day, a lot of email clients didn't support IMAP. They only supported POP3. Now every single email client supports IMAP. And then SMTP is still the standard used for sending emails. So you could type that all in, or cPanel is nice enough to provide a webmail for us as well. So I can click on check email and open up either one of these. And I have a basic webmail interface. So in theory, I should be able to send an email to myself and hit send, and there it is. So we know we set up our MX records properly. Okay. The last thing I'm going to go over is the origin certificate. So we have our connection encrypted between Google and Cloudflare, and we have our connection encrypted between Cloudflare and the end user, right? Because it's end user, Cloudflare, and then our web host. But what we don't have encrypted is the connection between Cloudflare and our web host. Now, this is a little bit overkill. We don't necessarily need to do this. However, if we want to make sure that we have what they call end-to-end encryption, we want to set up the security between Cloudflare and our web host. So we're going to go back to Cloudflare. We are going to go to crypto, and we're going to scroll down. And our edge certificate is at the edge of the network, right? So between the end user and Cloudflare, that's what's getting the edge certificate. But what we want is the origin certificate, the origin of the data, which is our web server and Cloudflare. So we're going to create a certificate. And what Cloudflare is going to want to know is what domains is this certificate going to cover. So we'll say maxmatthews.dev and star.maxmatthews.dev, which means any subdomain will also be covered on this, like www.maxmatthews.dev. 15 years is fine. I'll go ahead and hit next, and it gives me this giant dump out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my cPanel, and I'm going to do a search for SSL, and I'm going to click on this one here. And I am going to add in a private key. I'm going to scroll down, and it's going to say upload new private key. So I will go back to my Cloudflare, and I'm going to copy my private key into Cloudflare, and I'm going to say SSL for maxmatthews.dev, and I'm going to save, and it went and added in my private key. Now I need to upload, I need to upload my certificate as well. So I'm going to go to certificates, and I'm going to copy in my certificate. And I'm going to paste that in here. And I'm going to say maxmatthews.dev certificate and save it. Now that's been added in. So basically, it's going to use, we'll get into certificates, private keys a little bit more in the authorization and authentication model. But basically, this is going to use the certificate to make sure that Cloudflare is who it says it is, and it's going to use the private key for Cloudflare to make sure that my server is who it says it is, right? So it's like a two-way handoff. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to go to my cPanel, and I need to tell my cPanel that, hey, maxmatthews.dev is now a SSL site. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to look for Max Matthews. I might need to do, all right, so it says select a new domain, and I'm going to say maxmatthews.dev. And I'm going to say autofill, and it's going to pull in the certificate that I already uploaded, as well as the private key that I already uploaded. I'm realizing now that I could have skipped the previous 2 steps and just did it right in here if I wanted to, but it doesn't matter. It's accomplishing the same thing at the end of the day. I'm going to say install certificate. And what it's now telling me is that my server, anytime you access maxmatthews.dev, it's now going to serve that certificate. So I'm going to go back to Cloudflare. It has this certificate. So I'm now going to tell Cloudflare to be strict. So not only do we want SSL between the end user and Cloudflare, we also want SSL between our Cloudflare and our end user. Again, this is overkill. Some of the instructors would probably argue that we don't need to teach all of this up front. And it did take me years to figure out what all of this meant. But I have been asked, we deal with healthcare data at my company, and they have asked, do you have end-to-end encryption? And we would not be able to say yes unless we had this turned on. So I'm going to go back to maxmatthews.dev, and I was afraid of that. So we screwed something up. Something did not install properly. I cannot tell you the last time I have tried this and had it work on the first attempt. So let's see what happened. maxmatthews.dev is installed, and the certificate details are using the right thing. The edge certificate is here. The origin certificate is here. Come out of development mode for just 1 second. Whew. Okay, so I went incognito and it loaded. So incognito is a great trick because sometimes it just is propagating out, or your Google is expecting it to load a certain way and it doesn't. So going incognito can really help debug whether it was you or not. Okay, so it is loading. It just took a second for the server and Cloudflare to chat it out with each other. So the only thing I did not set up is SPF or DKIM. I will do SPF really quickly just because that's a common thing when you set up your web app. It will be required for you to set up SPF because basically you need to tell your DNS records, hey, here are the people who are allowed to send from our domain, from my domain that I've set up. If you do not have SPF set up, it's a common way to get sunburn. So you really want to be careful about that. No, too late in the night. SPF is important because it's oftentimes that you'll get sent into spam, especially if you have a new domain. So when you send your emails, a lot of times you'll get used to telling people like, oh, go check your spam filter. I go into spam all the time. Setting up SPF is one way to prevent going into spam filters. So I'm going to do a search for SPF, and I'm going to look at the records. Of course, it's not there. This one I'm going to cheat on. I'm going to go back to MZM Tech, and I'm going to look at my SPF record that I have set up there, which is this lovely thing. And then I'm going to go back to my domain, and I'm going to add, it is also a TXT record. You'll notice that SPF is an option here. That's a dated way of adding SPF records and is not encouraged that you use it. However, there are some legacy systems that require it. So it is recommended that you do a TXT instead of doing the SPF directly. The name I'm going to put right at my root, and then in my click to configure, I'm going to paste this in. And what this is saying is, hey, we're using version 1 of SPF. There is only one version of SPF. They got it right the first time and didn't need to change it. But they put this in just in case. Just in case they released the version 2. They knew they wanted some way to differentiate between that. We add in plus MX to say, hey, this is going to be some MX records that you're looking up. And then we have all of these IP4s here, right? So you notice that I have Zoho here. That's because I used to send my email through Zoho. So we want the ability for any time Zoho sends a message, we're basically saying, hey, Zoho is allowed to use my domain to send some email. You also notice this is my server IP address that we get from Namecheap. And so, or Green Geeks or whoever your web host is. So we add that in here. We can delete these two out. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to hit save. And that's all it takes. We don't need to tell our web server that we're using SPF, but what's going to happen is whenever someone gets an email from me, their mail client behind the scenes is going to go to my DNS, is going to look at the text records, is going to realize that I have some SPF set up, and it's going to say, hey, was the sender of that email address, was the sender of that email in the allowed list from SPF? Because if it was, then they are an authorized sender. If it wasn't, someone's masquerading as me, and it's probably spam. Okay, I can hear your brain sizzling because I have fried them so much. I know this is a lot to take in. I hope that the recording is helpful down the road. It may not be next week, it may not be next month, but at some point you're going to have a client and go, I know what video to go to watch to do this because I wish I had this video. And it is good for you guys to hear this live in person. I'm going to leave the last 30 minutes. If you guys would like to walk through this configuration on your own domains, we definitely can do that. But before I leave you, a 3-hour video is a lot to go through. So let's go to Google Docs and define what all of these terms mean. So you'll also have a resource for that. So I will send a URL in Slack in 1 second.
Linda Kovacs is on Slack. She said she really likes the lesson and she didn't know all of this about Cloudflare when she set it up.
I'm telling you guys, you're probably going to think, oh, this is such a boring class. We didn't do anything. But a year from now, you're really going to be thanking me that we went over this.
Well, definitely not thinking that. So
I just sent a Google Docs link in the CIC student resources. That is editable. So let's go through these. What's an A record? NS.
Name service.
What's the registrar?
It doesn't point to the registrar. It points the registrar to wherever your DNS records are hosted. Cname.
Who?
Cname.
Oh,
It's like the A record, but it's also like an
it said it's not an IP address. It has to resolve the IP address.
Yep.
It's like a shortcut.
MX.
Something to do with email.
It's like the A record for email, right?
And it's, you know where the email host is?
TXT.
It's an open field that's used for verification.
Google Analytics won't work on your site until you prove you own the domain. I think that's the clue. That's the one.
SPF.
Your policy.
Yep.
Emails are getting sent, but not all by your web host. People will send an email on your behalf, like MailChimp sends out marketing emails for you. And this, and this is, if someone says they're getting a bunch of spam, you can ask them something because SPF can tell them whether or not the mail is coming from you or from a spam. You also said something about DKIM recording will embed a hidden part of the headers of the email.
Let me see if there's a.
Encryption key, and then I got lost after that.
Yeah, DKIM is something that I never fully wrapped my head around. I got the concept of it, which is basically that it uses a key that gets embedded in every email you send to prove that. Do you have a basis on DKIM?
It's sort of like you have your private key, and then your email is sent with public key, and there's a circular reference where the sender receives back, or the receiver sends back something to verify that it's you. I can't remember if it actually uses PGP or not.
Or something similar.
Something similar.
A key gets embedded in the hidden headers of every email that you send. The email client uses that information combined with the DKIM record in your DNS to validate the email sender. Call that DNSSEC. Used to secure the connection between your registrar and DNS host. SSL.
Secure socket. That's for the encryption.
That's like the final piece of the encryption. Between the email and the user.
Not email. SSL is only used for websites.
For websites, yeah.
domain registrar. What was the other one that was recommended?
Is that like Grain Geeks too, or?
Hover is pretty good.
Hover, that was the one. Thank you. Quadruple A records.
It's like an A record, but more complicated.
And it uses the IPv6 system.
They have like different IP addresses.
That's pretty much how I sum up DNS. It's like configuring your domain, but more complicated. Web host or server.
WordPress or
Where you-
blog links
where
for
your
your
website
website.
lives.
Files, database.
I think we all know what email is, but I'm just going to say set up using MX records, also IMAP and SMTP, which are protocols to access email, but not related to DNS. Right, so you don't need an I'm taking that line out. They are protocols. Sometimes you need to set up subdomains to make those protocols work. But again, that's going to be information that your web host is going to give you that you're going to set up. And they'll tell you when your web host gives you information, they're going to give you all the information you need to put into your DNS records. So they're going to tell you it's an A record. They're going to tell you what the subdomain is supposed to be. They're going to tell you what that A record is supposed to point to, or they're going to tell you it's the CNAME, the subdomain, and then what the CNAME value is going to be. Domain.
Name your website.
HTTPS.
Hypertext transfer protocol.
Secured.
Secure.
Combined with SSL to encrypt web traffic to and from your website. Okay. FTP.
How you transfer your files back and forth. Locally to
Web
the
host.
host.
WordPress.
Yeah. Content management system. And you need to put that on a subdomain if you don't want it to completely take over. Well, that's one strategy.
Yeah. IMAP. I thought it was Internet Messaging Access Protocol, but I bet you I'm wrong on that because I don't know if I've ever looked up what IMAP stands for. Oh.
Yeah.
What do we use it for? I have your brains for 19 more minutes.
Isn't it for email?
SMTP.
Isn't that also for email?
What in particular?
Control access email.
Not to access, only to send it.
Oh.
Anyone know what it stands for? SMTP has been, no, SMTP has been around since 1982 and is still used to send every email in the world uses SMTP. SMTP is not only a standard for the way I tell my server to send an email, it also is the standard that makes every email host intercommunicate. So Gmail can tell Outlook Live, that can tell my personal web server, right? My little web server with my one email address can use SMTP to send an email to the Gmail servers, which have, you know, obviously millions and millions of servers. HSTS. I just looked up the name of it and forgot already.
Strict transport security is a web security policy mechanism to protect websites against protocol downgrade.
Let the web browser know that your website is guaranteed to have HTTPS/SSL for a certain amount of time. Pre-list. A list of websites that has HSTS and therefore HTTPS that is stored by the browser. I will include the preload link.
Is that the list that you said it might take a couple of months to get on?
Yeah. Well, once you submit it, it says you're on it immediately. It takes a while for the browsers to update it, but it doesn't really matter if it's taking a couple months to get on there, because you'll have HTTPS rewrites set up or redirects, and you'll also have it set up so as soon as someone goes on your website for the first time, it doesn't matter if you're on that list or not, the browser is still going to remember that information. You don't want to turn HSTS on until you make sure you can access your website over HTTPS, and that you can also access all the subdomains on your website. You will make a client very, very cranky if you turn on HSTS before you have all of the HTTPS set up, because what HSTS is saying is my site's available over HTTPS. And if all the subdomains aren't also ready for HTTPS, all of their things will break. And then you would have to go to every individual computer that has loaded the site, since you turned on HSTS, and go into a dev menu and remove your domain from that, or set up HTTPS on all the subdomains as well. So can really fuck things up with HSTS.
Just to put it lightly. So put that.
Just to put it lightly.
Can we just add that note? This up in all caps.
It's that one.
Yeah. Great idea, one that you really don't want to screw up. Origin Edge certificate.
It's from Cloudflare and lets your clients know that there's end-to-end encryption.
Yeah, so I'm going to split that. The origin certificate is
Server to
yep.
yeah, and then the other one is from the user in the server.
Edge certificate, on the other hand, is also a certificate generated by Cloudflare to securely communicate with the end user and Cloudflare. Cloudflare.
The date of our existence.
Anyone see what I typed in?
Awesome shit.
Time to go.
Can't top that.
Yeah.
Cloudflare is a DNS host that provides caching, free SSL certificates, and much more. DNS propagation. So time it takes for your DNS to kick in to your end users. Normally it's only a couple minutes, but it can take up to 48 hours. Using incognito in Chrome can help to debug. Use this to tell your clients that it might not work immediately. It is often a joke by server admins who manage DNS, that when they go, oh, did you get the DNS propagation done, or did you get your the work done yet? You go, oh yeah, it's done. It's just taking a little while with DNS propagation. And while it used to actually take 48 hours to have things propagate, normally it does happen in an hour or so. It is possible to actually change your DNS server to someone who is faster. Both Cloudflare and Google, and then the third big one is called OpenDNS, offer their own DNS servers. So if I go to my system preferences and under advanced in DNS, you'll notice my DNS servers are set to 8.8.8.8 and 8.8.4.4. Those are Google's DNS servers. They tend to work a lot faster. If you don't put in your own DNS servers, it will normally default to whatever the your internet service provider's DNS servers are, which tend to be much slower. So because you haven't changed your DNS servers, you may try and hit my website, the maxmatthews.dev, and you might not get WordPress. And the reason for that is because it's coming from I used to know who the ISP of the Tech Garden was. Northland Communications has the fiber network downtown. And their DNS servers might be a little slower, but I might be able to load it on my computer because I told my computer, don't use Northland, go use Google instead. The other big ones are Cloudflare, which actually owns the IP address 1.1.1.1. And OpenDNS in the memory banks of useless information, I believe, is 208.67.something.222 and .220. Let's see how close it was.
So I have a question. So is this a step that we should take if we're concerned about how quickly our pages will load?
Oh, I just had to duplicate it. I was so close. Yes, a lot of developers will have their IP address changed to either Google or Cloudflare or OpenDNS. Those are the three big ones that are free. The other benefit to switching them is that you can actually tell Google or OpenDNS that I changed the DNS records, just flush them out for me, which will happen automatically. But if you go to OpenDNS cache flush, there is a page where I can go to maxmatthews.dev and type in, and it will tell me that all of these servers, all the open DNS servers around the world are resolving to this 112 IP address. But what I'm actually going to do before I forget is I'm going to delete everything that I just did and point it back to my website redirect. I know, little painful, but it served its purpose. So I'm going to remove the site from Cloudflare, and I'm going to go back to Google Domains, and I'm going to tell Google that the past 3 hours of work were for nothing, and that I want to use the Google domain name servers. And as soon as I save them, turn that on before I forget. If I go back up here and I check the domain, we'll notice that all of these are still 112. OpenDNS was the last thing they were told, as that was my web server. But if I go down here and I hit refresh the cache, it's going to do what is called cache poisoning, which tells OpenDNS whatever information you have is no longer up to date. So go get the more up to date information. And you notice that my IP address has now changed all over the place. That's not something, you can't go to Northland Communications and say, hey, my DNS has changed, go update your cache. And I've had clients screaming at me, I need my site updated now. And I'm like, well, your site is updated and I can show you on my computer that it's updated. And they go, well, it's not on mine, so you must have done something wrong. And I say, well, pull out your phone. And they go on their phone and it works on their phone. And they go, well, why isn't this working on my computer? You still screwed something up. And it's just like, it takes time. It just takes time. You're talking about millions and millions of DNS servers all around the world. They need to update. And so even now, if I go incognito back to maxmatthews.dev, it failed. This is just going to take time. But once it does go through, everything will be fine. And in fact, by the time you guys get home tonight, you can take a look at this and it will probably be back up and running.
Okay, because I'm just imagining him screaming at you saying, how much time? And what was your response?
24 to 48 hours.
Okay.
The other thing that you can keep in mind is that you don't want to delete the old web host until the new web host is up and running. So it's not that you need necessarily 24 to 48 hours of downtime. It just means that it's going to take 24 to 48 hours for the new site to show up. And that's a very important note. If you are changing DNS records, one, give it time, because it might not be you. There is a chance that you did do it right. The other thing is that don't take down the old website. Like what I just did is I deleted it in Cloudflare. That was bad of me. I shouldn't have done that. I should have changed it at Google, waited for it to start working at Google again, and then deleted my Cloudflare. Because there will be some people for the next 48 hours who still think that my name servers are at Cloudflare. And if I had just left them alone, it would have worked for those 48 hours.
And it's not the hosting, it's just the domain name server.
Correct. It's just the DNS system knowing that it needs to look at another place. And Google has another similar Google DNS cache flush. And it works very similarly. I'm going to go type in my domain name, and I'm going to tell it that changed my name server and say I'm not a robot and flush the cache. And it's taking a second. It's updating all their DNS servers all around the world. Now it says it's flushed. And if I go incognito, it's back up and working again.
Beautiful.
But it might not work for you guys because your DNS servers would be set to Northland, who might have the old information. But give it a couple hours and it would work. Yeah, so it's taken a second, but it will eventually go back to normal. And it is also normal to buy a play test domain and play around with all of that stuff before you do it on an actual client's domain. You know, it's $12 for the year to have a dummy domain. And I often, you know, I have a list of all these domains, and I only use 2 of them, right? I only use my maxmathe.ws and my MZM tech domain, and then everything else just redirects into them. Make sure I have my email set up and my website is all. Yep. So eventually that will start working again. Okay, I only left 3 minutes. I apologize.
I have a question, maybe this is like outside of doing all the security and stuff. So you get your domain name from Google.
Yep.
Then if you have like your index HTML, you have to go to WordPress to upload it, and then you have to get a web host.
Not necessarily. So you have to get a web host, but you don't need to use WordPress. WordPress is just an option. If you're making websites for clients, it's kind of the go-to option because clients will want the ability to edit it on their own. However, you'll buy your domain through Google. You'll go buy your web hosting. Your web hosting is roughly $4 a month. If you're paying more than that, you're probably paying too much. One thing I didn't mention is there are free options out there. So Netlify is a free option. A couple other free options are GitHub Pages. GitHub has their own web hosting. The limitations of those web hosts is that you don't have server-side code. So you can't have node code or PHP or anything like that running on GitHub Pages or Netlify. You normally have to pay for that. There are other free options out there like DigitalOcean if you want to set up your own web server that can do that. Things like GreenGeeks can't even run Node, but they can run PHP. And PHP is what WordPress requires, so you can run a WordPress site there. Anyway, web hosting normally about $5 a month. What you will end up doing is either pointing your Google domains name servers at GreenGeeks and saying, you know what, just let GreenGeeks manage this for me. And if I want to add new DNS records, I'll do it within my cPanel. Or you would add the DNS records directly at Google. And that's it. That's all you need to do, and your website will be up and running. And you'll do your MX records, you'll do your A records, you might do a Cname record for www. That's all you have to do. You won't have HTTPS set up, and you could buy it through GreenGeeks. I'm not sure if GreenGeeks is supporting Let's Encrypt yet. A lot of web hosts are starting to do that, which you could set up Let's Encrypt HTTPS through your cPanel and have HTTPS and be done. The optional additional steps on top of that is, well, if I want the encryption between Google and my name server, not even my website, but just the DNS records encrypted, you would do DNSSEC. If you want to tell the browser all of my websites are set up with HTTPS, you would use HSTS. If you wanted to not figure out Let's Encrypt through the web host or get other features through Cloudflare, like the CDN network, and Cloudflare has a really cool option. If your website goes down, Cloudflare will go, well, because we have it cached, we can just serve the latest version of your website, even though your server's down, even though GreenGeeks crashed or Namecheap or whatever, we can just serve the latest version that we have. And they call that always online. So that's a really cool feature. Like I said, with Cloudflare being free, there's not really a reason not to use them. And they do make HTTPS much easier to get set up. With that said, it does add complexity. So Cloudflare is not a requirement, right? You can get a site online with just whoever your domain registrar is and your web host. And chances are your web host, you could also buy the domain right from them. So these are all additional things that you don't have to do. But at least it's you know, you've heard of them. And you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go through this list really quickly and flag what's optional. TXT records are pretty much optional. SPF is optional. DNSSEC is pretty much optional. SSL is kind of optional. I'll do that as a double star. It used to be fully optional and only bank websites used HTTPS and SSL. At this point, pretty much everyone is telling you you need to use HTTPS. WordPress is optional. INAV FTP DKIM is optional. HSTS is optional. Pre-list is definitely optional. Origin certificate is required to make HTTP. Nope. Edge, well, I'll do kind of optional for this and optional for that. Cloudflare is definitely optional. I wish DNS propagation was optional. And then I'll do so hopefully that will help when you're going through the video to just go, okay, I don't have to get that set up.
I just want you to know that I would have gladly paid to attend this class had it not been free through Careers in Code.
I think people would pay to see this class on YouTube.
Yeah, yeah. I think you need to package it and
Yeah.
just send it to us privately and then charge a small fee for everybody else to watch it.
The only thing that I would have changed about teaching it is like have you guys follow along with it. The only issue is everyone bought their domains from different places, which is completely fine, and everyone has different hosts.
I think we all have Netlify. I think Jeremy made us go online one night. I don't know if we could have done it through them, but I think, does everyone have Netlify accounts?
Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah, we all have
Okay.
Netlify accounts.
And Netlify is kind of interesting because Netlify will either let you set up your own DNS or they can be your DNS host for you. So you can either point your name servers at Netlify and go, I'll manage all my DNS at Netlify, or you can just point your A record at Netlify and manage your MX records and all of that stuff at your registrar or through Cloudflare.
So I'm just trying to translate. Are you saying we would have been able to perform these steps or no?
Most of them, yes.
Most of them?
In
So-
2 different ways.
So since we all have Netlify accounts, would there be an opportunity for us to go through some of this?
If I didn't have just 3 days left next week, yes.
Okay.
With that said, you got me for an additional week after that, the second to last module of the program.
Okay.
So there is a chance that, because I got 4 days to fill and about 1 day's worth of content. So
That would be great. That would be great if we could do this.
with that said, Gus is coming back not next week, but the week after that, and is doing infrastructure and deployment. So you will have an opportunity to play around with all of this DNS stuff. But let him know on Monday when he comes in that you would like practice with DNS. Because I said, do you want to cover that in your week or do you want me to cover it? And he went, please God, please, not me.
We can wait for you.
Gus, not dissing Gus, but this is something that I would have paid $100 for this, you know, when I got started. So,
But my thinking is, I mean, we have the video, so we can kind of, you know, marinate over it and let it digest. And then by the time you come back, we just access our Netlify accounts and just go through it with you.
yeah, the bigger thing is, do you want to be hosting your websites on Netlify? And if you want to get into the WordPress world, the answer is no.
Right.
The other thing is if you're just doing a basic static website, Netlify might be overkill. GitHub Pages might be a better fit.
Well, not to, because I do have, I do have web hosting outside of that,
Yep.
and a domain outside of that, just for the sake of consistency, because you were saying that one of the issues was that we've all purchased through
Sure.
different providers, but I just wanted you to know that Jeremy
Netlify
never
is
saw
an
set up a Netlify account, so if you were looking for all of us to be in the same place
Yes.
for the sake of the activity, Netlify is that something that we all have.
I appreciate that. And on the roadmap for tonight was, if this all went faster than I thought, was to do either GitHub Pages and Zoho email or Netlify. But that's something that I think I'll keep in the back burner. We'll see how much you guys cover in the infrastructure and deployment week. And then when I come back for the authorization and authentication week, we can make most of that week. What do you guys want to talk about?
Yeah, definitely don't want to dive back into this, but I'm like, I really need to get back into this. So,
Sure.
yeah, if everybody else feels.
All right, well, I'm going to end the stream because we are over time, and we will